Number 44 of the Standing Committee on International Trade, pursuant to Order 1082 and the motion adopted by committee on Tuesday, June 9th. The committee is commencing its study of enforcing Canada's import ban on goods using forced labor. We have with us today, and we appreciate them making themselves available on short notice, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for helping arrange this meeting on short notice. From Canada Border Services Agency, Mr. Hamilton, Ms. Toxopias, from Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade and Development, Ms. Wilshaw, Mr. Brookfield, and Ms. McDonald. Thank you very much for attending. I understand there will be one opening statement from Ms. Wilshaw, so you'll have 5 minutes. And just for the committee's reference, we have 12 motions on notice, and so I've just secured additional resources. But we'll see if we can get out of here quickly. Thank you very much. Ms. Wilshaw.
Thank you very much, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to the committee. The Canadian government acknowledges and welcomes the interest by the members to eliminate forced labor in Canadian supply chains. Forced labor also violates fundamental rights of human rights, which touches in a disproportionate way the most vulnerable populations of the world.
It's unfair competition for businesses that operate responsibly. Companies that invest in ethical sourcing should not be placed at a disadvantage by competitors who benefit directly or indirectly from exploitative labor practices. Pour ces raisons, le gouvernement du Canada s'engage.
For these reasons, the Government of Canada commits to eliminate forced labor from Canadian supply chains. It's a moral imperative and an essential measure to guarantee competition, fair competition conditions for Canadian businesses. It also contributes to reinforce the resilience and the security of supply chains, which serves the economic interests and the safety interests of Canada, as well as those of our allies.
To address forced labor through two separate but complementary mechanisms. An import prohibition on goods produced with forced labor introduced in 2020, and the Supply Chains Act, which came into force in 2024 and requires certain entities and government institutions to publicly report on measures taken to prevent and reduce risks in their supply chains. Notably, Canada is the only country in the world to have both an import prohibition and a federal supply chain transparency legislation to combat forced labor. Le 12 juin 2026,
on June 12, 2026, the Canadian government presented a bill aiming to strengthen the ban on imports, which is currently in effect in Canada, and improving our capacity to identify, to intercept, and to ban the goods that are produced in wholly or in part by use of forced labor.
This broader approach to responsible business conduct, which includes international partnerships that advance human rights protections and cooperation with like-minded countries to address forced labor globally. It also ensures that Canada is meeting its international commitments, including obligations under the International Labour Organization conventions, UN instruments, and agreements with our trading partners. We recognize that this is a complex global challenge that requires collaboration across governments, industry, and civil society. The introduction of this legislation marks a significant step forward in our ongoing efforts to address forced labor and underscores Canada's leadership in promoting human rights, strengthening the integrity of supply chains, and supporting fair and open trade. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And I want to say that my colleagues from the Canada Border Services Agency will also be able to do so, and to answer any questions about the operations of the system.
Mantle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. Appreciate your valuable testimony. I want to start on some questions on enforcement. Of course, an import ban sounds good, but if goods come in, it's not really much of a ban, is it? So last year, the U.S. blocked shipments of sea salt products from Taipei Salt Farm because of concerns they were produced by forced labor. Those goods appear to be available in Canada. Has the CBSA investigated whether those goods are produced by forced labor?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. On the detailed level of investigation question, I don't have that information in front of me in terms of the actual investigations ongoing, and my responsibilities within CBSA are outside of that particular area. Happy to take back those questions on notice if you want, but I don't have that information, unfortunately, available with me right now.
Okay, let's try another one. Last year, the U.S. blocked shipments of bicycles and bicycle parts made by Giant Manufacturing Co., the world's largest bicycle manufacturer. There are 2 stores that sell Giant bicycles here in Ottawa, several in the Toronto region. Has the CBSA investigated whether those bicycles available for purchase today in Canada were made by forced labor?
Mr. Chair, again, apologies to the committee member asking the questions. My role within CBSA is around the development of policy and authorities associated with a variety of different laws and regulations that the Government of Canada is trying to advance. I am not on the side of the CBSA House, so to speak, that works on either the investigations piece from a National Targeting Center side or from the implementation of the operations around the current export ban. And so I wouldn't be able to testify with any certainty or in terms of the details of any ongoing investigations or specifics related to goods that may or may not have been imported previously.
Okay, we'll try one more. 2 days ago, the U.S. blocked shipments of copper products made at a mine in Serbia by Zinjan Copper because they determined they were being produced by forced labor. It appears from public reporting that those copper products have been exported to Canada. Has the CBSA investigated whether those copper products entering Canada were made with forced labor?
Again, Mr. Chair, thanks very much for the question. I would say in terms of items that have been blocked from entry into the U.S. system, there is a healthy collaboration that takes place between U.S. CBP and Canada Border Services around sharing information, especially around re-exportation, which is a concern, so it doesn't get redirected into Canada. Again, I can't speak to the specifics of the case that's being identified, but I do know there is regular exchanges between ourselves and the CBP around such issues as re-exportation, where there are concerns with the goods that are trying to be imported into the U.S.
I have to say it's kind of concerning to me that we have 5 people here from what are supposed to be the responsible departments, and yet no one can provide answers or any information on goods that are publicly known for months to have concerns with forced labor. I find that unacceptable. And I don't think the CBP in the U.S. shares your view. CBP says that Canada has not taken action to restrict the importation of goods for which there is a known risk of forced labor. For example, Canada has taken only minimal action to investigate the importation of goods that are subject to withhold release orders or findings, or comprehensively address forced labor goods produced in regions of concern. Is that true?
I believe, Mr. Chair, the quote is coming from the USTR 301 investigation report.
It is, yes.
Yeah, I would say from my role in CBSA and my understanding of the cooperation that takes place between our 2 organizations, we have embeds within national targeting centers in the U.S. that are run by the CBP. They also have embeds in ours. There's a healthy exchange of information that does take place. Operationally, how that plays out in terms of different imports, I wouldn't want to speak to the specifics of, but those are the words of the U.S. I wouldn't want to testify to to them specifically. Would maybe defer to Global Affairs if they have overall comments on the USTR report and its findings.
Another concerning aspect of that report is that they say the CBSA, the agency responsible for enforcing Canada's forced labor import ban, does not appear to publish official statistics or other information regarding its enforcement efforts. Is that true?
With respect to forced labor import bans, that is true. We have not published statistics in terms of how many goods have been intercepted, whether or not they're successful, abandoned, or re-exported. The CBSA does take an open and transparent approach to publishing a lot of its enforcement statistics. It publishes an annual report, for example. There's often online statistics related to drugs, guns, inadmissibility concerns that are published on a regular basis on CBSA's website. We have not, given the limited number of cases that we have on the forced labor side, move forward with public reporting on those goods, but there'd be nothing that would prohibit the publication of generic material around the success of the import ban and the success of enforcement actions, so long as it does not lead to inadvertent disclosure of specific companies, because there are elements of privacy, obviously, and there are concerns related to Section 107 of the Customs Act around disclosing some of that information.
If the U.S. can publish the names of companies, the regions of concern, and the goods at issue, why can't you? Why can't the CBSA do the same?
I would just defer the question to the broader Government of Canada posture on this. The CBSA is an enforcement agency. We are not experts on forced labor. We do have MOUs in place with the STC who provide general reporting on conditions of concern where products are made, and that is what we use to inform our targeting, but we ourselves are not publishing a list of goods.
Thank you. Mr. Assassi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. Now, listening to Mr. Mantle, he cited a USTR report, and he's trying to paint this picture that Canada is a laggard. And of course, I'm referring to Mr. Mantle. But as I understand, that USTR report explicitly looked at practices in over 60 countries. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, you are correct. The USTR report looked into 60, they called economies, given that they included the countries of the European Union.
Absolutely. That's my understanding as well. Thank you for clarifying that. And I note, as was suggested in the opening remarks, that we have two pieces of legislation. Now we're proceeding with Bill C-35 to ensure that we're at the forefront of this. This is obviously a very challenging issue for countries around the world to deal with. It's complex, but of course there's the moral imperative as well. So who could tell us more about Bill C-35? Because some of the provisions I've seen in that seem to suggest that our system could very well become more robust than the American system, especially given the reality that there is going to be putting the onus on companies as opposed to putting the onus on our officials. So, Mr. Brookfield, I'm sure you know this new piece of legislation inside out. If you could tell us the key features of Bill C-35, I'd be grateful.
Certainly. So, as you may be aware, Canada is one of the first countries in the world to do a forced labor prohibition. We did that initially through the customs tariff. One of the challenges, my colleagues in CBSA can elaborate on with that process, is it did not allow for transparency for companies or the details for allowing a system to be in place for advance notice and analysis. So one of the key elements of Bill C-35 is it would be ability to establish a list that would deal with goods and with regions and or companies providing it. That would be a signal to companies importing that in those cases they need to have a very good demonstration through regulations that would be established that they are not meeting forced labor requirements or the item would be banned at the border.
So would it be fair to say in the event Bill C-35 is adopted that we would be at the forefront and that this would create a more robust system than even exists in the U.S. and in Europe?
Well, Europe is in the process of implementing its legislation. It's passed some bills that I believe their law doesn't come into force till the end of 2027. Experts from the SDC are able to speak in more detail to that. I won't try and compare with the U.S. specifically. I think you no doubt we could have witnesses when the bill is examined to deal with the advantages and disadvantages. But I would say it's very comparable to the U.S. measure and that virtually no other countries in the world, including the EU, if anything, is equivalent to it.
Thank you. And would it be fair to say that there's quite a bit of information sharing that's going on between our authorities and the Americans as well as Europeans as well?
I believe so. I can't speak to it personally. Those areas of forced labor cooperation tend to happen at the STC level, but it's their response at the International Labour Organization and elsewhere. But certainly we already deal very extensively with other countries, and part of the point, I believe, of having the bill under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is that will facilitate the kinds of exchanges that ESDC is presently doing at the Foreign Affairs level as well.
Thank you. Last question. I understand that for Bill C-35, there's going to be comprehensive consultations this summer where stakeholders and interested parties can come forward and make sure that Bill C-35 is strengthened. Am I correct in that?
Minister Nand has indicated that she will be going forth with consultations this summer. We're in the process of identifying how those can best be structured in a way to complement the many consultations that have happened already in the past.
Thank you. That's been very helpful.
Monsieur Bonin?
Well, clearly we're happy with the recent developments. For several years, the Bloc Québécois has been asking to eliminate forced labor. But we have questions in terms of the effectiveness of what's proposed in C-35. So the government proposed that they can identify products that are banned from entry, and you can't identify specific products for reasons of confidentiality, from what I understand. Is that right? No, if I said that, I was wrong. I'm sorry. But what I would say is that the list will not be in effect until the bill is in effect. And then we can bring in the regulations and the list. So we can't say what will be on the list before the bill is passed. So we've been asking this for years. The government did nothing. And now Mr. Trump has objected to it, and it's almost by magic that it's appearing now. So has the government been working for a long time on this bill? Were you consulted a long time ago for developing this bill? I can say that since 2020, when we implemented the Act on forced labor in terms of tariffs, that there were many developments in that field, including other laws, the Supply Chains Act. I don't know the French translation for that. But work has been done since 2020 on this file. Well, better late than never. So can you explain to me the difference between the current bill and what is currently in place? Just summarize this. We don't have a lot of time. And maybe ask you to provide us a document about the difference between the current regime and what this bill is proposing. Thank you for the question. The bill, well, just could you give us this comparison in writing? And you can also give us details now. Bill 251 proposed similar changes, especially about the creation of a list and a irrefutable presumption, but continued to use customs tariffs as a legislative instrument, which caused some difficulties for our colleagues. In terms of the regulations at the border. So earlier, my Conservative colleague asked 3 questions on specific products, copper and others, and you didn't have the answer to that. Could you also provide us in writing the answer to his questions? Are these products have been investigated? And you also talked about that you've carried out several investigations about products that were intercepted or banned. Could you give us the list of investigations that were carried out, what was accepted and what was rejected, and naming the products? Yes, absolutely. In terms of the list of the activities we already carried out, I have a list of the main elements, and we can provide it to the committee later. Earlier, you seem to be saying that what's being proposed as a bill is amongst what leaders in the world do. When I compare it with what's being done in the U.S., why did the government not simply propose what's happening in the U.S., given that we're responding to a demand of Mr. Trump from one day to the next? So why don't we just use what's being done in the States? And can you explain and justify in writing, that would also help us save time, the difference between what's we're proposing and what the U.S. is proposing, or what's being done in the U.S.? Yes, I believe the committee will have the opportunity when you're looking at it more closely. The legal system in the U.S. is very different from ours. So if we tried to use the exact same thing as they use, would not be possible. But also I want to emphasize the point that the American Act, in the Act, there are some regions that are stated. And I would say that this Act is more flexible. We could act or eliminate regions or places where products are being made. So if I'm carrying this Act with the U.S., both are good. But amongst everything that exists in the world, it's one of the best. So I heard that it's what Canada's proposing is better than what the U.S. has in place. I have said that I don't want to compare with the U.S., but I would say that it's stronger than what found in the rest of the world. Could you give us this comparison between the U.S. and Canada? You said it will be reviewed later. It probably will not be done by this committee, so we'd appreciate getting the information. It can give you a response, but not a legal analysis. So as legal as possible, given that it's a bill. But you're saying that we couldn't do what's in the U.S. and Canada for some reason. Could you give us more details about that and give us supporting documentation to explain why we can't do what's being done in the U.S. Here? I'm not an expert in American law, but their legal system, their legislative system is different from ours. You said that we couldn't copy what there happened. Could you give us more details?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. Chapter 23 of the existing CUSMA agreements reads in part, each party shall prohibit the importation of goods into its territory from other sources produced in whole or in part by forced or compulsory labor, including forced or compulsory child labor. Given that Canada is going to be importing electric vehicles from China, do you expect this practice to be a significant challenge in the upcoming CUSMA negotiations?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So, with respect to Article 23, you're correct that that's the existing obligation on the parties to implement and enforce a forced labor ban, and Canada has been clear that we feel we have met all of our obligations under the CUSMA. With respect to the potential for the Chinese EV, I can't speculate on how the U.S. or Mexicans may approach that in the context of the CUSMA review.
Okay, but they're not going to say that all of a sudden it is okay to import goods made from child labor. I don't understand. I don't understand if there is considerable evidence that automotive parts and automobiles are made with forced labor in China, and they're going to be coming to Canada. How could that not be a significant challenge during the CUSMA review?
So I think it's important to underscore that this import ban applies to all products made in whole or in part with forced labor, not about a specific country. So we wouldn't at this stage be saying that one product or one region. We're not at the stage of having a list, but at the point that we are, it applies to all products. So not about one specific country and not directly related to the issue that has been raised.
So in Bill C-35, which was tabled last month, it does refer to a list. Section 6 reads, the minister may by regulation establish a list of goods in respect of which there are reasonable grounds to suspect that they are produced wholly or in part by forced labor. Are we expecting automobiles and EVs and automobile parts from these troubling regions of China to be included in the list in C-35?
So I think in terms of the process and at this time, it would be premature to say what might be on that list. The bill has just been tabled on Friday. It needs to go through the normal process. The regulations need to be developed and the list produced in due course.
Okay, I have a report here from the U.S. Department of Labor from September of 2024. I'd like to read a quote from that report. In addition to manufacturing aluminum automotive parts, China processes a large percentage of other key inputs in the automotive industry. For example, China processes iron into steel, lithium and cobalt into battery-grade materials, and bauxite into aluminum. The U.S. Department of Labor specifically identifies electronics and lithium-ion batteries produced in China as automotive components that are produced with child or forced labor. So this is the U.S. Department of Labor. I can't imagine this not coming up in the CUSMA review. And I'm wondering, are we going to be putting a stop on the import of EVs from China once the CUSMA review is underway? Or I just don't understand how you reconcile the two, and I'd appreciate if you could shed some light on how that's going to work.
Sorry, I think it's premature still to say what would or would not be on the list. At this point, we don't have a list to demonstrate what we're concerned about. But it is not premature to say that the intention of the legislation is to prohibit the entry of all goods made with in whole or in part with forced labor. So not saying a specific at this time, but to say that all products that are made or in whole or in part with forced labor, the U.S. system, as I think my colleague mentioned, is their own and unique, and we would take into account a number of pieces of research and evidence in formulating a list of goods and high-risk regions. But at this time, I can't say what would actually be on that list at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. Just for the benefit of committee members, what's worked well in other committees is if you have additional questions, submit them by writing and we'll submit them to the officials after. Madame Lapointe, you will have an extra minute because your colleague, Mr. Assassi, yielded that time, which you may take up now.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to all the witnesses. Thank you for being here. It's very interesting. This information that you're providing us, it helps us to better understand the situation. How many other countries are in the process of adopting similar legislation with a public list of goods that might be at risk and increasing the burden of evidence for importers who want to bring goods in Canada? I'm sorry, I can't give you an exact figure, but I could say that there are 35 countries, according to the U.S. organization, that are developing these major elements. And you've permits of these 35 countries. What is the state of the implementation of the respective regimes, and how many have created public lists as the one you want to praise? I don't have an answer now. I'm certain that the U.S. has a list. Mexico has a system. I don't know if the list is public. And the European Union has not yet made a public list. I know that you mentioned several times the U.S. saying that they have a good system, but that it was difficult to compare with ours because our legislative system is better, and all for the better, I'd say. And if I come back to ask you to explain further, how does the legislative framework for the U.S. for forced labor is structured? What is the application of the application to goods that are at risk under the Application Reserve Act and that under the Forced Labor Act of 2000 in June. I'm sorry, but at GAC we don't yet have expertise in this these legal aspects. Maybe my colleagues at ESDC might better be able to answer this question. Thank you. But I'd like to ask another question. How is the U.S. Border Service, Protection Service, how did they share the data? Do they publish reports on seizures of goods? I know my colleague mentioned bicycles earlier. How is it categorized, and how can we have aspect? And what are the 5 major countries of whose goods have been seized because of forced labor? Somebody, Ms. Chavez, said it's not necessarily China, that there are other countries involved as well. I'd like to hear you say more about that. So I'll answer English to...
Public website, happy to provide the web link to the committee that allows the data to be searchable. And so you can search it by total value, you can search it by region, you can search it by commodity type, and they update that website on a regular basis, specifically for forced labor. But the CBP also publishes similar stats related to drugs and other commodities that they enforce. So it's a pretty rich data set that one can sort of sort through to understand not only where the goods are coming from, where they're being imported into from a port of entry perspective as well. So we'll make sure that is provided to the committee members, and they can have a look. In terms of the top 5 countries, I wouldn't, I've not gone through it and sorted it from that particular perspective. However, I would say from discussions that we've had with colleagues at Global Affairs and ESDC as well, where we tend to see forced labor risks materialized more acutely, it's in those type of industries that are very labor intensive, right? So textile industry, very labor intensive, agriculture, fishing, et cetera, some manufacturing processes as well. So those type of industries that rely heavily on human capital in order to create value or create products are typically where we end up seeing forced labor appearing most acutely.
Okay. C'est plus des secteurs.
So it's you examine things by sector rather than by country. Yes, that's right. Thank you. But I want to come back to ask questions about the American system, because everyone seems to say it's a good system, but we have differences with them. In comparison to the American system, would it be right to say that the Canadian approach that's proposed offers a simpler process that's better integrate connecting the list of goods at risk to the activities of enforcement of the Canada Border Service Agencies Act? Yes, there will be appropriate discussion in Parliament to see if that would work, but we want to have a clearer system and simpler system in our Act. And also, as I said earlier, a list that's more flexible and can be modified. So from what I understand, it will be easier to put this in place and to make it come into effect, more efficient. The list. How does the list of goods at risk be established? Can it be developed in parallel to the legislative process around Bill C-35? C-35, in its current form, gives the power to the Department of Foreign Affairs to create the list, and it was said earlier that there will be consultations on how that list could be created. Of course, the Act could be amended, or the bill could be amended, but as proposed currently, it will be the decision of the Department of Foreign Affairs. You said earlier that there had been consultations already, but it will continue over the summer. Yes, Minister Anand said that she would have consultations this summer, especially on how to create the list and on the evidence, and see what's important to create that list. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bonin?
De faire de même, Monsieur le Président. Vous venez de dire que ce qui est proposé comme projet de loi, ce
You have
serait
just
plus...
said that what's being proposed as a bill well, it would be simpler than what's done, for example, in the U.S., or let's talk about a bill that the Bloc Québécois had tabled that proposed to identify some regions where we know that there is forced labor, for example, with Uyghur, and that in those regions, it's the importer that has the burden of showing that these products were not produced with forced labor. That just seems simpler to me, to ask them to prove that you're from a region where there is forced labor, prove that there wasn't forced labor involved in the manufacturing of these goods. I know it might be simpler to have a list from the government rather than put the burden on the importer. I'm sorry, I haven't understood the list exactly, but that's what the Act proposes. There will be a list created by the Department of Foreign Affairs, and if a product is on that list, if it comes from a region, no, I know what the Act says. You told my colleague that having a list would be simpler than using the American system. We had a bill, and now I've lost a minute because you didn't answer the question, but you said it's simpler to have a list than to have the equivalent of the U.S. Act that identifies some areas. And when it comes from there, the importer has the burden of proof. What is more flexible is that in the U.S., it's a region that's named in the Act. So to change the Act, to change it, C-35 will say, will have it so that the list can be changed by the Department of Foreign Affairs without having to amend the law. So it's simpler for who? It's more flexible to ask or to eliminate regions. So is it complicated to do that, to identify sectors, or say that prove us that there is no labor, the goods don't have forced labor? The bill will say that so can we do what the U.S. does to identify sectors where there is forced labor? Parliament can identify that there are areas or places where forced labor is in. So if we do that, the details can be changed. Did you have discussions with the U.S. to see what they do and what the products are that have been seized and identified? Because you don't seem to know some basic products. Do you have discussions with them to help you develop your legislation? Not personally.
First, you could ask the same question, or don't even have to bother asking the question. We'll just get that as start as the answer in the next round, if you like. Save some time. Mr. Cram. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Mantle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to come back to your comments, Ms. Wilshaw, that there's no list that is currently used. Was that I understood your testimony or evidence? Was there's no list yet?
Correct. We have not produced a list or published a list at this stage.
So what has CBSA been using for the last 5 years or 6 years to inform its enforcement of the import ban?
In terms of the list as envisioned under the legislation, there is no public list. There is a target list that we have internally of, I don't have, again, I'm not on the operational side, but less than 1,000, more than a dozen is what I understand. So several hundred entities that are listed that we review import data against to see whether or not those companies are importing goods directly into Canada. Where they are, targets are sent to the front line in order to detain the goods for redetermination or inspection upon arrival.
You mentioned the list includes entities. Is it solely entities? Does it include goods, regions, countries?
In terms of
the targeted list that you say the CBSA uses?
We can get back to you in terms of the exact components of it. I don't have the list. I don't operationalize the list on a daily basis, and so I wouldn't want to inadvertently say there's no X on it when in fact maybe one of the places has an X listed. So
fair. Could you provide the committee a copy of that list, that targeted list?
I don't know whether or not that is possible, but I will endeavor to find out from those that are able to make that determination from a disclosure perspective whether or not that can be provided.
Would it be fair to say that that list will likely inform whatever proposed list is made or put forward for Bill C-35? or are you going to create a new list from scratch?
The bill obviously creates a new process for listing, new standard of evidence. It provides additional indicators that need to be considered when the list is made. Will this be one information source that is used to inform that eventual list? Most likely, I wouldn't want to prejudice future decisions around that, but obviously, we do know from working with our U.S. CBP colleagues that 90% of what ends up on the U.S. list starts from public reporting and NGO reporting around forced labor concerns. We'll be looking at a wide variety of information sources, obviously, including the ones held by government.
Can you tell me when the first draft of Bill C-35 was completed and sent to the Minister's office? Maybe Ms. Wilshaw can.
Yeah, so I think that question was asked in the FAA hearing, yes, and officials committed to looking into the possibility of providing that timeline to the committee there. So,
thank you. For months and months and months, we've heard from the government that Canada has robust measures in place to combat forced labor. But the issue is not the laws. The issue is the enforcement, as we've found out. So if we have such robust laws, why was C-35 necessary?
I think, as you've heard in other testimony, the government believes that this bill will provide a number of advantages. One of them is providing greater clarity in terms of which products and regions and potentially individual companies will be covered, but also to provide greater transparency to importers. One of the challenges right now is an importer has a bit of a loss potentially of knowing when it needs to have a higher burden of proof and when it needs to have greater detail and what that detail would be. So Section 8 of the law, for example, provides for regulations that would provide greater detail about what documentation is required to establish in one of the listed areas or products that they meet the requirement. So that's one of the advantages of the present bill.
So the previous regime wasn't sufficient, is what I'm hearing you're saying.
I think, as I said earlier, Canada was one of the first countries in the world to have a forced labor regime, and as we've heard since 2020 when that was introduced, the Canadian government has been seeking to improve it. Yeah. I would suggest that this bill is an attempt to improve that.
Fair enough, and we'll discuss the bill in more detail. Is either department or any government department going to be making submissions in the U.S. hearing process on their proposed actions?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. That is under consideration right now, and no decision has yet been made.
Fair enough. And I'll just end in my last seconds here. Mr. Hamilton, you spoke about great collaboration between CBSA and CBP. Can you answer then, if there's great collaboration, if you're working together, why, obviously CBP is taking a different view on Canada's enforcement. And they've provided facts in their report that this committee has discussed. So if there's collaboration, why are they proposing broad-based tariffs in response to our failure to combat forced labor?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think that there's a number of factors feeding into U.S. decision-making with respect to the Section 301 investigation. Ambassador Greer has been publicly has stated that part of the motivation behind looking into forced labor regimes is to increase and enhance enforcement of the existing prohibitions and encourage countries that have not put in place prohibitions to move forward in that direction. As noted in the report on the investigation, they found that there's a number of countries that have not put in place bans, and countries including Canada that have but are encouraging greater enforcement. There is also underlying the motivation behind this, the fact that a number of the U.S. broad-based tariffs, including the Section 122 tariffs, are expiring as of the end of July. And so there is some sense that part of the motivation behind the U.S. is finding an alternative source of tariff authority. And so I think the findings of the USTR need to be taken a look at in that context as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fonseca.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be sharing my time with MP Akan. First up, my focus of my questions will be on C-35. And would you agree that this bill builds on the 2020 import ban and the 2024 Supply Chains Act to create one of the most comprehensive forced labor frameworks in the world?
I think you probably will have experts, or the Parliament will have experts that would be better placed to provide a more neutral assessment, but that certainly is the intent.
Okay, so that it would be one of the most comprehensive forced labor frameworks in the world Canada would have.
That's the intent.
Thank you. Would you also agree that Bill C-35 shifts Canada's approach from proving forced labor after the fact to preventing suspect goods from entering Canada in the first place?
Perfect. Thank you very much for the question. Obviously, I think when you look at Canada's overall forced labor regime, there is sort of the dual intent, and in many ways, the forced labor import ban is the backstop or the last line of defense around the importation of those goods. That needs to work cooperatively with the Supply Chains Act, incentivizing Canadian businesses to understand their supply chains and make alternative purchasing decisions in order to eliminate those goods from even coming into Canada. So I think together those two items work to provide a very comprehensive regime. I'm sorry I missed the last little bit of your question in my answer. If I didn't respond to it, please let me know. I'm happy to elaborate.
Yeah, so rather than proving forced labor after the fact to preventing suspect goods from entering Canada in the first place, so what are the steps that would kind of change that, reverse that onus so that businesses would be able to provide the information? What information would you be looking for from business before that importation takes place?
There are two elements within C-35 that facilitate that sort of prevention element. The one is the public list. So and companies making purchasing decisions to import goods into Canada will know where there are risks, and they may choose to make purchases elsewhere. There will also be regulations that prescribe pieces of information that will need to be presented to the CBSA if you're importing goods off the list. That will require those purchasers and the importers to understand their supply chains and really sort of dig deep in understanding where those products are coming from. Potentially through that process, they will identify proactively forced labor within their supply chain, make alternative purchasing decisions, and it'll prevent those goods from being imported into Canada.
Okay, and I understand there will be consultations over the summer as we go through C-35, but in terms of recommendations that have come from labor organizations, human rights groups, businesses that have called for these enforcement tools, have some of those been addressed within C-35 that you can you respond to that?
Yeah, broadly speaking, in 2023 and then again in 2024, the government, once under Global Affairs, once combined with the ESTC and CBSA, undertook public consultations around the forced labor frameworks. A number of the items that were identified through those consultations are reflected in the legislation that came forward in Bill C-35, primarily the ability to produce a public list, provide transparency for importer obligations. And I would say that the other piece that came up in 2023 was obviously the ability to do this pre-arrival, so the ability for the government to be able to work with importers to make sure that those goods are the determination is made in advance in order to smooth and facilitate ultimately the importation of those goods.
Thank you. MP Akan.
Mr. Hamilton, the current framework relies on a risk-based approach to identify the shipments of goods that may have been produced by forced labor using risk assessment and random selection. Under the introduction of Bill C-35, the agency would work from a targeted list of higher risk products with the onus on the importer to prove their goods are free of forced labor. You explained very well the steps that you will be taking to my colleague's question. Could you please also tell us how would this targeted intelligence-led approach strengthen enforcement compared to the current method?
Very much for the question. I think as we have learned to operationalize the current forced labor ban within the customs tariff, one of the challenges that we've identified is that application is done on a shipment by shipment basis, right? And so we need to identify a particular shipment at risk in order to be able to target it, as opposed to a much broader list, which in fact it's broader, but it's actually more targeted because it allows us to focus our enforcement efforts. So through the elements in C-35, We anticipate being able to better direct our officers' attention to very specific shipments coming in. And then the information requirement elements within C35 will also mean that our officers will be able to make faster determinations, because we will know that the importer will have to have the information available that we will be able to review to make determinations around whether or not those goods were made with forced labor.
Merci beaucoup. Last round.
Thank you very much.
Cram, followed by Mr. Nakvi, and we'll have Mr. Bonin for 2.5 minutes. That will conclude our meeting, and then we'll get to some of the motions. Mr. Cram.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to circle back to the witnesses about the Chinese EV imports. CBC reported just a couple of weeks ago, they had an article with the headline, Chinese-made electric vehicles start arriving in Canada. Nearly 3,000 Chinese-manufactured EVs landed in the country last month, and that's all based on data from Global Affairs Canada. So what guarantees do we have today that those 3,000 Chinese EVs that arrived 2 months ago were not made with forced or child labor?
All I can say is the existing forced labor import ban applies to all products, and that is currently the mechanism being used to prevent goods coming into the country that are made with forced labor. So that's in the customs tariff, that is the existing mechanism by which goods coming into the country would be assessed.
If the U.S. Department of Labor has found that many automobiles and electric vehicles and auto parts made in China are used with forced and child labor, what can you just give us some insight into the enforcement mechanism? Do we have inspectors that go to China and look at the assembly lines? Like, how does that work?
I would defer to my colleagues about how the enforcement is currently done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. I think in some ways you're stumbling on some of the challenges we have identified through the use of the customs tariff. Broad-based reporting around high risks of use of forced labor in general industries would not allow necessarily us to be able to have a successful detention at the border, because it's like shipment by shipment basis. So the burden of proof is that that particular car that is in front of you has a particular chassis that is made from aluminum that was produced using forced labor. So it becomes a very, very challenging level to get to, because it's a shipment by shipment. And then the next shipment of cars, we'd have to reprove that exact same supply chain is in place in order to determine that they were made with forced labor. So it becomes inherently difficult on a shipment by shipment basis under the customs tariff, which I think is one of the things that the intent of C35 is to address.
Okay, so then we can anticipate in the list in C35 that automobile parts and EVs from these regions of China probably should be included in that list then? Is that a fair statement?
I wouldn't want to speculate in terms of obviously what will make the list, but I can say in terms of the targets that we currently have ongoing, automobile parts, textiles, seafood are some of the commodities that are in there. So it would not surprise me that automobile parts would be in there. Whether or not they're specifically linked to a region, I wouldn't want to presuppose what ultimately makes it onto the list, though.
Okay, but if we are, let's suspend disbelief for a minute and assume that the U.S. Department of Labor study is correct and that these parts and these imports do have to be stopped. We're going to stop these Chinese EVs as soon as C35 is up and running and enforced then. And what does that look like, and what does that mean with the canola tariffs that the Chinese recently lifted?
I think we just have to go back to what we've said, which is we can't presuppose what's on the list at the moment, nor could we anticipate the reaction of any trading partner to their position on the list. If that is named at this point, it's too early to say.
All right, Mr. Chair, how are we doing for time? 1 minute, okay. Well, would you say that it's more than a little bit irresponsible for the government to have let in these 3,000 EVs from China without the ability to ensure that the supply chains do not have forced and child labor at every step of the way?
I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that question. I don't think any of us would want to presume what where the government has been in terms of this. We have a ban on imports made with forced labor. My colleagues have described the challenges with the enforcement of that, but there is a total ban on goods made with forced labor at this moment.
Okay, and Chair, I think that's my time.
Thank you. Mr. Nakvi?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and for your fairly detailed analysis. This committee has taken a lot of interest in forced labor issues, so we really appreciate you coming, and obviously happy to see Bill C-35 being tabled because I think a lot of issues that has been discussed in this committee are reflected in the bill before. I'm always keenly interested in a bit of a comparison with other like-minded jurisdictions to better understand where we lie, especially when it comes to our allies, United States, European Union, for instance. Can you give us a sense of where Bill C-35 is in terms of alignment with the regulatory regime that European Union has put forward, the scheme, the legislative scheme that our American partners use? Are we somewhere in the middle? Are we sort of going one particular way or the other? Just a bit of a comparator in that, and if you've received any feedback, response from our partners in Europe or United States, for example.
Well, I think it's premature to provide any comments on what Bill C-35 might be compared to the United States and the EU since it's recently been introduced. We certainly are in touch with the United States and Mexico and the European Union and other of the 35 countries I mentioned who are working on addressing this issue. I think it's fair to say that the U.S. system is of longer standing. I believe their law dates back to 1930, and other countries and economies like the European Union are looking carefully at the U.S. system and how to potentially improve it. My understanding is the European Union's ban on products made with forced labor entered into force on December 13th, 2024, but will not become applicable in full until December 14th, 2027. So I think the European Union is a comparator that we'll be looking at very closely. Their system is obviously, like the U.S. system, very different from ours, so it's not necessarily going to be possible to compare it one for one. And again, I expect there'll be experts before Parliament who can provide a more nuanced analysis, but our intention is to be as strong or stronger than the European Union in terms of outcomes.
Can you speak to the enforcement aspect in this bill and the dispute resolution mechanism? I understand the onus is on businesses, on companies to make sure that if a product or jurisdiction is listed, that they have to comply. If there is, well, first from a CBSA perspective, what is the enforcement mechanism envisioned on our end, and if there is a disagreement with that enforcement, what are the remedies available for the companies in question if they want to dispute?
Thank you very much for the question. Bill C-35 does lay out a dispute mechanism that the importer can appeal to judicial review in the federal court if they disagree with the decision that has been made by CBSA in order to allow those goods to enter in. That does have some advantages. That is like a faster process. It's a transparent process, so the results will be available online publicly, and so there's some advantages to having that set up that way. In terms of the enforcement action that would flow out of Bill C-35, obviously, I don't want to speculate in terms of what will take place in the future. I would say, though, that Bill C-35 contains a number of elements that address a number of challenges that the CBSA has identified within the implementation of the current forced labor ban. And so we would anticipate that that would be favorable in terms of our overall enforcement action. I think also the public list will also provide a lot of visibility to importers to better understand areas where they should be taking a little bit more time and attention to understanding who their suppliers are. That in and of itself may change purchasing behaviors, which may negatively impact enforcement action because businesses are being more responsible and getting supplies elsewhere. So we'll have to see how that plays out in terms of the implementation of whatever Bill C-35 looks like if it passes Parliament.
1 minute. My last question would be around the consultation process. I know there's a fair bit of consultation that has gone into drafting of this bill and tabling. I think, Ms. Wilshaw, you did mention that the minister intends to consult on the list aspect. Can you speak to that as to what the content may be around the consultation and the process that's being envisioned and the timelines, the time frame, if you got that information? Thank you.
I can say that Mr. Nunn is committed to consulting this summer on what factors would inform her choice should this bill become law in terms of Section 6 and the creation of the list. I would expect that that will draw on existing consultations and existing material, including that provided in the United States and elsewhere, and that the focus will be on seeking from Canadians views on how the Minister of Foreign Affairs' role should be in implementing this legislation, and notably in terms of what approach she should take to preparing that list.
Merci. Mr. Bonin?
Je reviens sur vos relations avec les États-Unis. Donc, quand ils identifient, par
Come
exemple...
back about your relation with the U.S. So, when you want to identify if something is the product of forced labor, do you discuss to be able to identify those products?
Information sharing, it's established with U.S. And we do exchange that through our National Targeting Center, and we do inform our targets based on that.
How many products in Canada have you identified as being banned?
Merci de la question.
1 million?
0, 1,000, 1 million? You have no idea? You don't know. How many products are in Canada are considered to be the fruit of forced labor? No one can give me a figure.
Mr. Chair, it's a difficult question to answer because in some ways it has to be time bound. I honestly, I'm not 100% sure.
C'est pas vous. Qui est responsable de ça?
So who would be responsible for this? To identify the products
the border is the
forced labor.
responsibility of the CBSA to enforce the laws that come into to play when goods enter Canada. That's what we do in terms of once goods are released into the economy. In terms of accounting for those goods, that would be the responsibility of other ministers, and I would argue probably some provincial jurisdictions as well.
Yeah. C'est... Fait que pouvez-vous nous fournir cette liste-là?
Could you provide us this list? There must be one somewhere, a list of products, banned products.
The internal list of items that we have reviewed, we committed to see whether or not we can release that list to the committee.
Et comment vous vous basez sur quoi pour identifier justement ces
And
produits-là?
you base yourself on what? To identify those products, you base yourself on what the U.S. is doing, for example? If it's banned in the U.S., we looked at it, or Human Rights Watch, how do you identify those products?
Dans la façon que la liste est créée,
The way the list is created, it draws on various sources of information. We have agreements with ESDC.
Obviously, consultations with the U.S. and other parties, exchange of information under Customs Mutual Assistance Act supports the creation of that as well.
Fournir au comité justement vos critères.
Could you provide the committee with the criteria which allow you to reach those conclusions? What filters are used in relation to a product, or the methodology, so we can understand it? Yes, we will ask ESDC to provide that information.
Concludes our rounds. I want to thank our witnesses, but just before you go, I just had a couple things I wanted to clarify. There's some question about lists. Is there a current list that there's some confusion? I couldn't understand. Is there a current list that either department is working on with respect to goods that would maybe fall under C-35?
So I think to clarify, we're talking about a public list, which is something that we will be working on going forward, that is envisaged in Bill C-35. I think what my colleagues have been talking about, and I would defer to them, is an internal listing of high-risk products. Maybe you can clarify that these are two separate things.
Okay, and to the extent that you could share the list you currently have with the committee, we would appreciate that, I think, as that's been asked in a follow-up. Mr. Bonin?
Petit point d'ordre suite à cette
Point of
discussion.
order after this discussion. You mentioned earlier that we could table requests in writing because I'm not sure that our questions were answered. Absolutely.
Give my finance time on the finance committee. In your follow-up with the committee, could you provide a estimation of the number of FTEs that will be assigned to enforce C35 when that comes out? And then finally, an issue that we have been having a difficult time. You mentioned unfairly traded goods for Canadian companies. We've been having a difficult time getting the CIMA handbook, so I would appreciate it if you could take that back to your colleagues and provide that to the committee. That's been an outstanding request of this committee, and a motion on notice actually to the same effect, but certainly would appreciate your efforts in helping us get that. And with that, I would like to thank you for appearing and spending all of your time with us on short notice. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Thank you to all of those who help us, our translators, our support, our analysts, and of course, our wonderful clerk in seat number 1. Thank you very much and have a great summer. Move adjourn.